So I think we can begin. So Venerable Losang, Dondra, would you like to say a few words, or we should start with the prayers?
Yeah, just wanted to, before we start with that, just wanted to welcome Dr. Moore back to the center. It's been several months. He's been an instrumental part of our online virtual international faculty. He's done the basic program for us before and done other classes as part of our Heart Lama series. So we're really grateful that he's an ongoing presence here at the center with our international community. So just welcome back, and thank you so much for agreeing to lead our students through this again.
Thank you. So we'll establish our motivation for the session, and just considering that the opportunity of not only knowing about this text, but being able to approach it with a deep and warm mind of love and compassion is probably the most extraordinary thing we've ever managed to do in our entire samsaric history. So it really is without question the most remarkable text. And as we're going to be become very clear during the teachings, His Holiness says that we should keep this text beside us like the dearest friend and spend time with it every day. So to study it in some depth, of course, gives us an incredible opportunity to understand the relevance. So just establish the most powerful bodhicitta motivation, aspiring to become fully enlightened in order to benefit others, countless others, suffering in the various realms of samsara. And in order to do this, we need to overcome our own self-cherishing minds, displace them with a mind that cherishes others. So with that, we'll recite the Refuge in Generating Bodhicitta prayer. The prayers are slightly different. I mean, they're almost exactly the same, except His Holiness has made some recommendations for a particular sequence of prayers before studying this particular text. So I thought for reasons of auspiciousness, it was good to follow His Holiness's suggestions. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Abandon evil doing. Practice virtue well. Subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop, or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning, or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. So His Holiness recommends that while reciting these words, we reflect upon impermanence and the lack of reality in phenomena, and we conclude with a prayer of dedication. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds, and may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. And now reciting together the Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on mass of Vultures Mountain in Rajgir, together with a great community of monks and a great community of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound, perfection of wisdom, and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the noble Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no touch, object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, Bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Taya ta, gate gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. And His Holiness also asks us to recite the praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You, whose dragon, thunder-like proclamation of Dharma, arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields a sort of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of ignorance. You, whose princely body is adorned with 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri, Umarapatzanadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. By the virtue of offering to you, assembly of Buddhas, visualize before me this mandala built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron water and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effects. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds. From our offering without attachment, my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. And mandala requesting teachings. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Om Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. So thank you. So usually a commentary on Shantideva's Bodhisattva, which is the text covering the whole path to enlightenment, would take many months. And this is referring to having several teaching sessions every day of the week. Therefore, I'm not positioned to give a commentary on every verse, but will seek to focus on key points and also unravel difficult sections as best I can. So, just as Geshe Jumpa Gatso in his presentation for the basic program on engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds, given at Lama, the Institute, Lama Tsongkhapa Institute in 2006 to 2007, felt the need to declare, and I quote, "According to the time allotted to the basic program, we will have to go through this text very quickly, like an aeroplane." So I must announce also that I'm going to necessarily be keeping a rapid pace. Similarly, in his in the translator's introduction to the Padmakara translation of the root text and commentary by His Holiness, we find the following. Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara is a text covering the whole path to enlightenment, and while it never fails to inspire, it contains sections that require detailed commentary if they are to be fully understood. Complete oral commentary would take several months, and within the time available, it was not possible for His Holiness to cover more than the essential points exposed by Shantideva. So for this reason, I'm warmly recommending us to utilize the various excellent commentaries that are readily available to us, as each contributes its own inflections and details. So by studying in a very comprehensive way, we can over time assemble a substantial understanding of not just the vast content of this most precious text, but also fathom the way in which we are to put it into direct practice. For direct practice is what Shantideva is calling for. From this experiential perspective, our efforts of study are valuable because they not only inspire us to immediately apply ourselves to the practice, but to do so in a manner that is expertly skillful, as it will be based on the living transmission of the practice lineages which we have had and will have in the future the great good fortune to inherit from our own precious teachers. at the head of whom stands His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who repeatedly emphasizes that this text, as I mentioned a little earlier, should be our daily companion. And this is because Bodhicitta, the mind of Bodhicitta, is our dearest friend. Shantideva himself says in verse 30 of the first chapter, "Where is there comparable virtue? Where is there ever such a friend? Where is there merit similar to this?" Introducing his own commentary, His Holiness says, and I quote, "I received this transmission from Tenzin Gyaltsen, the Kunu Rinpoche, who received it himself as a disciple of Tsar Patrul Rinpoche, now regarded as one of the principal heirs, spiritual heirs of this teaching." And His Holiness adds, "It is said that when Patrul Rinpoche explained this text, auspicious signs would occur, such as the blossoming of yellow flowers, remarkable for the great number of their petals. I feel very fortunate," His Holiness says, "that I'm able in turn to give a commentary on this great classic of Buddhist literature." So here we're immediately alerted to the important classical commentary by Kunsang Tenzin. And this has been translated by the Padmangara Translation Group under the title "The Nectar of Manjushri's Speech, a detailed commentary of Shantideva's Way of the Bodhisattva." So my copy was published in 2007. Kunsang Pelden was a direct disciple of Patrul Rinpoche, and this book was composed of notes taken from Patrul Rinpoche's teachings. So at this point, I just want to touch upon the unique qualities of the learned 8th century master Shantideva, because this is truly, truly inspiring. Though the great Buddhist historian Taranatha presents 7 extraordinary deeds of Shantideva, I shall only indicate that connected to our root text itself. And my source is directly Taranatha's History of Buddhism in Tibet, which was composed in 1608. So, I quote, "Having abandoned his claim to the throne of King Kalanavarman, having received a vision in a dream in which Manjushri told him to do so, Shantideva went to the Madhya Nalanda, received ordination under Upadhyaya Deva, and had the name Shantideva. He lived there in the company of Panditas and used to eat 5 mahadronas of rice at each meal." That's a lot. Though inwardly, Taranatha says, he was always meditating and listening to the doctrine of Arya Manjushri. He composed the magnificent works like the Sikha Samachaya, Digest of All Disciplines, and the Sutra Samachaya, Digest of All Sutras, studying the doctrine in its entirety. Outwardly, he appeared to sleep day and night and to do nothing of the 3, namely listening, cogitating, and meditating. Our lineage lamas, with typical ribald Tibetan humour, put this detail as eating, sleeping, and shitting. These are all that the other monks considered Shantideva good for. Thus, they prepared to have him evicted from the monastery, and to this end devised a cunning strategy whereby Shantideva would be made, or induced, if you like, to effectively evict himself. So I'm returning now to Taranatha's account. The other Panditas discussed amongst themselves and decided to drive him away, as he was causing drainage to the materials reverentially donated to the Sangha. They thought, if we recite the sutras by turn, taking turns to recite to the public of monks, he will have to go away of himself. When this was arranged and it was Shantideva's turn to recite a sutra, he at first did not agree to do so, but on being repeatedly pressed, he said, "So you prepare a seat for me and I shall recite." This made the monks doubtful, but most of them assembled with the idea of humiliating him. The Acharya sat on the lion throne and asked, "Should I recite the existing ones, sutras, or something new?" For sizing him up, everybody said, "Recite something new." Then he started reciting the Bodhisattva Charyavatara. During the recital, he came to the verse, this is in the 9th chapter, when existence and non-existence cease to be present before the intellect. While uttering these words, Shantideva rose up into the sky. His body was no longer visible, but his voice continued to be heard uninterruptedly. Thus he completed the recitation of the Charyavatara. Kunzang Pelden, as does Kabje Zopa Rinpoche and others, adds an intriguing further miraculous detail to this account, involving the intention of the Pandit monks to severely humiliate him. They built a throne upon which Shantideva was to sit, which was so inordinately high that it was impossible to climb upon it. Therefore, Shantideva would surely make a total fool of himself. So, to go back to Taranata's account, they sent for Shantideva. Most of the monks were thrown into confusion when they suddenly caught sight of him sitting high up on the throne, not knowing how he had managed to get there. So you can see here that it was a miraculous event. So, of course, after this incredible event, Shantideva, despite many pleas, left the monastery. Wasn't this what the monks had formerly planned? So after a time, it was discovered that Shantideva was living in the south at the stupa of Sri Dakshina. Two of the pundits who had supernormal powers of memory went to see him, intending to invite him back to Nalanda. But when they met him, it proved inconvenient for Shantideva to return. Nevertheless, in answer to their inquiries, he affirmed that the correct version of the Bodhisattva Charyavatara corresponded to what the scholars of Magadha had produced from memory after the discourse. So this is just referring to the fact that amongst the monks who had heard Shantideva recite, there were some slight differences in their account of the number of verses and so forth. As for the other two famous texts of Shantideva, Shantideva indicated that they'd find both written in a fine scholarly hand and hidden in the roof beam of his monastic cell at Nalanda. He then instructed the two panditas, giving them explanations and transmissions. So Kunzang Pelden, in his commentary, continues the story. He says, Shantideva later travelled to the east where, through the demonstration of miraculous power, he resolved a serious conflict, a war, creating agreement and happiness between the two contending parties. He also accepted as his disciples a group of 500 people living not very far to the west of Magadha, who were holders of strange non-Buddhist beliefs. There had been a great natural disaster and the people were tormented by famine. They told Shantideva that if he could save their lives, they would respect his teachings. The master took his begging bowl, filled with cooked rice received in alms, and blessing it with profound concentration, fed and satisfied them all. Turning them from their uncouth superstitions, he introduced them to the Buddha's doctrine. So I'll leave the biographical account here, but in his summary of Shantideva's approach to himself, his own being, if you like, Kunzang Pelden adds, although for his part, Shantideva claimed to be no more than an ordinary man, Chaitari tells us that he was considered an emanation of Manjugosha. In the estimation of Prajna Karamati, he was an Arya or noble being, and referring to the excellence of his words, Vibhuti Chandra wrote, quote, "Many beings have appeared, great lovers of Buddha's teaching, yet in realization and experience, none have I found like Shantideva." So here we are with this incredible text in our hand. His Holiness observes that Shantideva composed his text in the form of an interior or an inner dialogue. And His Holiness says that Shantideva, in doing this, turned his own weapons upon himself, doing battle with his negative emotions. Therefore, His Holiness adds, when we teach or listen to this text, it is important that we do so in order to progress spiritually, rather than making it simply a subject of academic study. So this is clearly a point that I'm wishing and needing to really emphasize at the very outset. What is it that we wish to achieve, and precisely how do we intend to achieve it? Indeed, it could be said that there is nothing more important for us to do than precisely this, as all positive consequences for both ourselves and others will flow from this resolve, the resolve being to study and implement these teachings so that we might rapidly enter and progress along the Bodhisattva's path to full enlightenment in order to rescue our suffering mothers. And in order to do this, we need to pay continuous attention, as His Holiness is describing Shantideva doing, of paying continuous attention to our own minds, as otherwise, how are we to transform them? We can't even recognize what's going on in them, let alone transform them, if we don't pay attention. So in other words, our aim in approaching this text is not at all lofty. It should be seen as truly grounded and thoroughly pragmatic. His Holiness always emphasizes, quote, "I usually consider the teachings of the Buddha under two headings: activities and views. Activity means refraining from harming others. This is something that is universally helpful, something that all people appreciate, whether they are religious or not. View refers to the principle of interdependence. Happiness and suffering and the beings who experience them do not arise without cause, nor are they caused by some external creator. In fact, all things arise from causes corresponding to them. This idea, His Holiness adds, is upheld by all schools of Buddhism, and so I usually say that our view is one of interdependence." So His Holiness embellishes and develops this point in a very beautiful and moving way. He says, "The view of interdependence makes for a great openness of mind. By training our minds and getting used to this view, we change our way of seeing things. And as a result, we gradually change our behavior and do less harm to others. As it says in the sutras, and we quoted this in our opening prayers, abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. So, to learn how to avoid even the smallest negative actions and feel inspired to perform even the most apparently insignificant positive actions without underestimating their value is precisely the great and immediate task that Shantideva throws our way. If everything we experience is, as it were, programmed by our actions, and if these actions in turn depend upon our attitude, then clearly we are being emphatically invited to become adept in not only becoming aware of our attitudes as they arise, but also in knowing how to skillfully work and transform them. In particular, Shantideva is asking us to radically transform our attitudes away from the self-centered, self-cherishing mind so that we might dynamically replace it with the most extraordinary mind of all, that of Bodhisattva, the advantages of which are elaborately presented, as we shall see in the very first chapter of Shantideva's text. So to boil all this down, the issue of our motivation, our framing attitude, is everything. And our motivation is a modality of our mind, a functionality of our mind. As it says in the Vinaya Sutras, and I quote, "The mind precedes phenomena, and mind is primary. The mind is swift accordingly. When someone has acted or uttered words with a pure mind, their effects follow him, just as the shadow of a tree never abandons him." The mind precedes phenomena, and the mind is primary. The mind is swift. Accordingly, when someone has acted or uttered words with a hateful mind, their effects follow him, just as the cart driver's head was severed by the cart. Now, I'm just going to clear away a few of the broader issues, if you like, surrounding our approach to the text. I just want to mention now the issue of translation. I'm going to rely on Stephen Batchelor's popular poetic rendition called A Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Eminently recitable, this is also the version still used when His Holiness is giving commentary on Shantideva's text. However, at times I'll also refer to the excellent translation by the Padmankara Translation Group, and my copy of this was published in 1999. It is especially valuable, this account is especially valuable when we get to the 9th chapter dealing with the profound wisdom. And the reason for that is that Batchelor has imported and incorporated large slabs of commentary from Togme Zangpo's own commentary on the chapter. And in the process as readers, we perhaps lose sight of the concise shape of Shantideva's root verses, especially as Batchelor decided to dispense with poetic stanzas altogether in his translation of this part of the text. There are other important translations available, and such as this one by Kate Crosby and Andrew Skilton, which is a translation directly from the Sanskrit. So that has its own very particular value as well. And in the case of my utilization of Geshe Doga's commentary, which I had the fortune, many others had the fortune of attending over several years at Tara Institute, we also worked with a translation by the Venerable Fedor Strachey, And this was sort of to ensure a kind of relationship between the Geshe Doga's commentary and the root verses. So in those cases, I'll be always numbering the verses that I'm referring to in whatever translation I'm going to use, so that in your own space and time, you can utilize other translations as you require. So I'm also going to be referring to a number of classical commentaries, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama pays particular attention to the commentary by Minyak Kunzang Sonam, who was a disciple of Jamyang Khyentse Wangpo, titled The Excellent Vase That Grants the Qualities of the Bodhisattvas. It's not currently translated fully, to my knowledge, into English. However, the commentary to the very, very challenging 9th chapter is available in a book called Wisdom, Two Buddhist Commentaries, editions Padmakara 1999. And Minyak Kunzang Sonam's commentary has been given the title of The Brilliant Torch there. Geshe Jumpa Gatso's commentary embeds the commentary of A Precious Garland, a commentary of Shantideva's Engaging the Deeds of a Bodhisattva by the abbot Drugpa Geltsen. And this is available to us in translation by Totsi Gi, and it's embedded in Geshe Jumpa Gatso's commentary, but it's also available as a PDF separately, and that's available in our Google folder. And Kunzang Pelden's commentary, titled The Nectar of Manjushri's Speech, a detailed commentary on Shantideva's Way of a Bodhisattva, is also available. So I'm going to suggest here that in our approach to this text, we shouldn't in any way even have a glimmering of a thought of being sectarian. I mean by to feel absolutely empowered and comfortable, as we should, of course, in drawing upon commentaries on this text from all Buddhist traditions. This is a great flourishing of commentary, and be very, very foolish to not enjoy it. So while we'll find different emphases in each of the commentaries, when it comes to the difficult topic of wisdom and establish the meaning of the two truths, however, we will be relying mainly on Geluk commentaries, the tradition of Lama Tsongkhapa, because there's a particular utilization of terminology there, for example, which has a very, very clear meaning for those of us who are studying within this tradition. And there are also some very, very subtle aspects of difference in the view between the different Tibetan schools. And we could get confused because often the same terms are used, but have different intentions according to the different traditions. So His Holiness is always stressing that they all arrive at the same point. So that's why we should feel very confident about that. In other words, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara is highly regarded by the teachers of all the Buddhist Tibetan schools. And he says that perhaps as many as 100 commentaries have been written upon it. So I'm also going to be utilizing a number of contemporary oral commentaries, and such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama's, Geshe Jumpa Gatso's, Geshe Jumpo Geltsen's, Geshe Tuni's, Geshe Losang Jumpal's, Geshe Sonam Rinchen, and last but not least, Geshe Losang Doga. And where possible, I'll make these available in the resources kit. Also, I've made it a practice during my preparation of each class of footnoting all quotations so that the original source can always be located. I do this to show explicitly my own reliance on such texts, especially as I have no qualifications to teach this text whatsoever, especially on my own. So I want to say here that any mistakes in my presentation are entirely my own. However, it's truly inspiring to have so many rich resources at our fingertips. We're going to look now at the structure of the text. His Holiness, there are a number of different ways of describing the overall structure of the text, so we'll have an opportunity of looking at those. But I'm going to mention the one that His Holiness emphasises in for the benefit of all beings. And it's drawn upon the teachings of Patrul Rinpoche, to which we referred earlier. And it goes as follows. For those who have not generated bodhicitta, the first 3 chapters of the text explain how to do so. Then, to prevent bodhicitta from declining, there follow the instructions in the chapters of carefulness, attentiveness, and patience. After this, the chapters on endeavour or enthusiasm, meditative concentration, some of the translators meditation, and wisdom describe how bodhicitta can be continuously developed. Finally, according to this account, the 10th and concluding chapter discusses how to share and dedicate this bodhicitta that has been generated, protecting it from decline and increasingly developing it. So His Holiness adds, this is how Patrul Rinpoche explained it, and I find it very profound. So I'm now going to refer directly to Minyak Kunzak Sonam's account of the structure, which is available in translation. And he says, Aryachara Krishnapada explains the main body of the treatise in 3 parts. He says, this is the source of His Holiness's point earlier, he says that the first 3 verses show the reasons for the treatise coming into being. Then the text teaches the conduct of the 6 paramitas. The first 3 chapters and the dedication teach generosity. The 4th and 5th chapters teach discipline. And the next 4 chapters, beginning with the 6th, that are patience, teach the remaining 4 paramitas. Finally, he says, the text concludes with a homage of remembering kindness. Nevertheless, it should be pointed out that the subject matter of the first 3 chapters is mainly generating bodhicitta, and that generosity is only taught as an ancillary topic in this chapter. So he goes on, Acharya Kalanadeva describes the text by dividing it into 3 virtuous parts. The virtuous beginning, which is the homage, the virtuous main part, which continues until the dedication, and the virtuous conclusion, which is the dedication itself. And he adds, other past scholars claimed that the first 2 verses advise us not to waste the freedoms and advantages and to make this life meaningful. Then the first chapter shows the benefits of bodhicitta. The 2nd and 3rd show the method of generating bodhicitta. The 4th and 5th show the way to guard the training and of the actual nature of the training, which consists of the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections. The first 2 paramitas are to be understood from the first 5 chapters, while the remaining 4, beginning with patience, are taught in the next 4 chapters of patience and the rest. So Acharya Varachanarachita says that the explanation of the benefits of bodhicitta commence with the verse, quote, this free and well-favoured human form. Yet other Tibetan commentaries logically explain that the first two verses, referring to chapter 1 here, reveal the necessary support for bodhicitta, and that is how it will be explained here. More specifically, these two verses teach, firstly, the physical support by explaining the difficulty of gaining a life of freedoms and advantages, and then the mental support by explaining how difficult it is to develop a virtuous state of mind. Therefore, thereafter, the main topic of the text is explained. How, for the most part, it is in accordance with the explanations mentioned above, but to explain in a little more detail. So this is really worth paying attention to. In the beginning, it is necessary to develop enthusiasm and inspiration for the Mahayana teachings by seeing the benefits of generating bodhicitta. So, the first chapter reveals these benefits. Then, we need to confess our misdeeds, which are not conducive to developing bodhicitta. In fact, they're antithetical to developing bodhicitta. And we also need to accumulate merit in order to create the right conducive circumstances for travelling on the path. So these topics are taught in the second and third chapters. Having generated bodhicitta, the method of training in activity as a foundation for the attainment of great enlightenment is then taught in general and specific terms. From the perspective of the first, because conscientiousness is so important of ensuring that our mind or our activity does not degenerate, and that we adopt positive actions and avoid negative ones, this is taught in the fourth chapter. Then, more specifically, chapter 5 teaches how to train in discipline by relying on mindfulness and awareness while practicing the 5 parameters. So you notice here, while practicing the 5 parameters. Then the next 4 parameters of patience and so on are taught in the following 4 chapters. The method of training in generosity, the first of the perfections, involves learning to train in giving away our body, our possessions, and our sources of merit to others. And this is shown in the 10th chapter in particular. So to put this another way, we could say that the 4th and 5th chapters teach discipline. Generosity is taught in the verses on offering to the 3 jewels and giving away one's bodies, possessions, and sources of merit. And though there is no particular chapter devoted to it, it is still found here extensively, and as just mentioned, is also taught very, very directly in the 10th chapter, when we dedicate merit, which is giving away, isn't it, our merit, and the homage of remembering kindness. Therefore, to summarise, this treatise teaches all the stages of the path of awakening, beginning with mind training of the path, and this next bit is crucial, common to beings of lesser and middling capacity, which serves as a preliminary to the mind training in the approach of great beings, referring to the mind training of bodhisattvas. And then the generation of bodhicitta and the training in the bodhisattva's actions. So the nature of the fruition of Buddhahood is also taught briefly in the 9th chapter. So let's summarize, because it seems like a lot of detail there, but it makes incredible sense when we do reflect upon it. In the beginning, referring to chapter 1, which is sort of subtitled The Benefits of the Awakening Mind by Batchelor, it is necessary to develop inspiration and enthusiasm for the Mahayana teachings by seeing the benefits of generating bodhicitta. So for that reason, that initial reason, the first chapter reveals these benefits. This is made even more explicit when we notice that Kunzang Pelden evocatively ascribes the following subheading for the first chapter: the excellence and benefits of bodhicitta, whereby the heart is filled with joy. This ascription of joy is directly connected to the verse, which says, quote, Shantideva's verse, "This intention to benefit all beings, which does not arise in the minds of others, even for their own sake, is an extraordinary jewel of the mind, and its birth is an unprecedented wonder." Extraordinarily beautiful and meaningful verse. Chapter 2, which Batchelor describes as the disclosure of evil, and chapter 3, the full acceptance of the awakening mind, involves our need to confess our misdeeds, which are not conducive to generating bodhicitta, and nor are they conducive to accumulating the merits required to create the right conducive circumstances. So these are taught in chapters 2 and 3. You can see here there's a kind of experiential, organic, underlying structure of the chapters to do with our own mind generation, as it starts from a seed and is then cultivated. Chapter 4, conscientiousness or awareness. Having generated bodhicitta, the method of training activity as a foundation for the attainment of great enlightenment is then taught in general specific terms. I quoted this passage before. From the perspective of the first, because conscientiousness is so important, of a means of ensuring that our activity does not degenerate and that we adopt positive actions and avoid negative ones, this is taught in the 4th chapter. So this chapter, as does the next, guarding alertness, involves becoming deeply imbued with the practices and disciplines of moral discipline, thereby enabling us to creatively and skillfully work with a now restrained, supple, and flexible mind. We are no longer battling our mind as we might battle a wild elephant. With conscientiousness or carefulness and vigilance or guarding alertness, we have a rope and a prod to restrain the wild elephant mind so that its real power, its real potential can be accessed and utilized. Chapter 6, patience, chapter 7, enthusiasm, chapter 8, meditation, chapter 9, wisdom, deal with the 4 parameters: patience, enthusiasm or joyous effort, concentration, and wisdom. Chapter 10, as I mentioned earlier, is describing a method of training in generosity, how to train our mind in giving away our body possessions and sources of merits to others. So it actually shows us how to do this. And it's for this reason that our precious teachers often recommend that we recite this dedication chapter when we hear the news of someone's death. We recite it on their behalf. It's the most powerful practice to do at that time, to send all ways of our accumulated practice and all the ways of accumulated practice of all the precious Buddhas and holy beings towards the goal of protecting that individual in their future time. So the other reason why we have to train in ethics with such care in the middle of the text is because, as Shantideva says, in chapter 4, verse 1, whatever wholesome deeds, such as venerating the Buddhas and generosity that has been amassed over 1,000 years, will all be destroyed in one moment of anger. So this is another reason why the chapter of dedication is so incredibly important. So to secure a flourishing, separate from destructive karmic interruption or damage, a bodhisattva or a bodhisattva trainee must assiduously take care to dedicate, and to do so in an optimum fashion by conjoining it with the mind realizing the emptiness of the three spheres: subject, object, and action. This is because, as we're going to see very clearly in the text itself, the habitual force of our negative tendencies, with which we've been familiar with since beginningless time, is incredibly strong. This is why Kabje Zopa Rinpoche so frequently spends several hours leading us through extensive dedications, following what might have been apparently an initial brief discourse. To see dedication, in other words, as a mere add-on in the way of a ceremonial sign-off to our practice is to execute a grievous mistake. So to examine in a little bit more detail the issue of the structure of the chapters in terms of the six perfections, six perfections of generosity, morality, patience, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. To draw a direct correspondence between the six perfections and the individual chapters is in many cases extremely difficult. For example, as I've mentioned, Minyak Kunzang Sonam in the Nectar of Manjushri's speech indicates that the perfection of generosity is found distributed throughout the text, though it is particularly prominent in the 10th chapter. This wider distribution makes more sense when we recognize that there are three forms of activity encompassed within the perfection of generosity. In the words of Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, the first perfection is the perfection of charity. Its nature is the virtuous thought of giving. With that thought, we perform three types of charity. This is the crunch. Three types of charity. Giving fearlessness, giving dharma, and giving material objects. These encompass, says Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Kabje Zopa Rinpoche, all our activities of body, speech, and mind, such as giving material objects, protecting from fear, namely the fear of death, and the giving of Dharma itself. So you can see here that because of these multiple meanings incorporated in a single perfection, it's very difficult to kind of completely encapsulate them within an isolated chapter as if it has no bearing on the practices being discussed elsewhere in relation to the path. So this is inviting us, I think, to read not in a doctrinaire fashion, but in a very relaxed and creative fashion, so that we can begin to draw these associations and these linkages ourselves, because this really brings the living presence of the text home. So it's exactly the same kind of issue when we try to locate where the practice of morality is taught. Kabje Zopa Rinpoche again, the second perfection is the perfection of morality, of which there are three types: refraining from non-virtue, gathering virtuous deeds, and working for the benefit of others. The first, refraining from non-virtue, is abstaining from actions intending to harm sentient beings. The second, gathering virtuous actions, means completely giving up the thought of seeking happiness for the self, including self-liberation. The third, working for others, means just that, Rinpoche says, protecting sentient beings from harm as well as helping them in any way we can. So again, this complex meaning or content of this perfection is again found distributed widely in the text. With the practice of the perfection of patience, however, we're on slightly more concentrated or recognizable ground, in that the 6th chapter, the very famous 6th chapter, Patience, deals with the need of patience to especially overcome the faults of anger. And as Shantideva is going to mention at the end of his 1st chapter, this is a real issue for a kind of beginning Bodhisattva, an aspiring Bodhisattva, because to get angry, for example, with a holy object, such as another Bodhisattva, is to wipe out huge swathes of positive merit that we've accumulated perhaps over many, 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 many lifetimes. The alternative to this, of course, is paying homage to those holy beings. And as we're going to see, the first verse of chapter 1 deals extensively, or involves an extensive understanding of the meaning of paying homage. So we'll have opportunity to go into that. So likewise, the perfection of perseverance or joyous effort is intensely dealt with in chapter 7, that of enthusiasm, and the practice of concentration relating to chapter 8, meditation, is also very, very direct. Likewise, the perfection of wisdom is extensively presented in the famous 9th chapter, that of wisdom. Yet even in this case, there are many references to the need to generate this wisdom found throughout the text. For example, the selflessness of persons is presented very clearly in the 6th chapter on patience, namely verses 27 to 31, where it is related to our understanding of interrelatedness, or what His Holiness described earlier as interdependence, and thus describes the nature of our ethical responsibility to others. So this is an example of what I meant by relaxed and creative reading, because Shantideva is bringing this topic of selflessness of person, namely myself, in at a particular time when he's asking us to behave ethically towards others. Really, really interesting. Consider why that topic has come up. And so I'll read the verses to give you some inkling. That which is asserted as primal substance and that which is imputed as a self, since they are unproduced, do not arise after having purposely thought, I shall arise in order to cause them, other people, harm. If they are unproduced and non-existent, then whatever wish they have to produce, harm will also not exist, since this self would permanently apprehend its objects. It follows that it would never cease to do so. So it's not really the time to give a commentary, but just to begin thinking about this, if I existed inherently in and of myself, independently of causes and conditions, a base of designation, and a mind imputing I here, there would be no sense in which I could produce harm towards others, or I could cease producing harm towards others if producing harm was already my inherent nature. This is because law of causality could not operate whatsoever if I and others existed inherently. Shantideva says in verse 29, furthermore, if the self were permanent, which would have to be, wouldn't it, if it was unrelated to anything else, it would also be devoid of action, just like space. So even if it met with other conditions, how could its unchanging nature be affected? Even if when acted upon by other conditions, it remained as before, then what could actions do to it? Thus, if I say that this condition acts upon a permanent self, how could the two ever be causally related? Hence, everything is governed by other facts, which in turn are governed by others. And in this way, nothing governs itself. Having understood this, and this is the sort of the clincher, having understood this, I should not become angry with phenomena that are like apparitions. They don't exist in the way they appear as real solid entities from their own side. So you can see here how incredibly creative Shantideva is in his own presentation, because he keeps drawing in whatever is necessary to enrich a particular point. So I might jump following sections. I've gone to quite a lot of detail about the relationship, I think, between the chapters and the perfections. And also I've invited us to consider how we might read the text. So I now want to jump again to some of the more technical aspects of our presentation. We're going to encounter these issues going forward, and that's the issue of outlines. There are a number of traditional and classical outlines for studying this text, each based on a particular commentary. So it's difficult to settle on just one if we are going to utilize resources more broadly. So you'll find this yourself. For example, as already mentioned, Geshe Jumpa Gatso's commentary embeds the commentary of Precious Garland by the Abbot Dragpa Geltsen, which we'll find in our Google kit. His Holiness, when he teaches this text to broad public gatherings, doesn't normally refer to elaborate outlines, as he usually gives an oral transmission of the text while pausing from time to time to elaborate specific details or stress key points. So I'm going to be facing the same constraints. However, to provide a point of anchorage or coherence, we shall emphasize the commentary of Gyaltsabje, one of Tsongkhapa's most important senior disciples, and his commentary, The Entrance for the Children of the Conquerors, a commentary on Shantideva's introduction to the actions of Bodhisattvas, has been translated by the Venerable Fedor Strucker and has been kindly made available by the Venerable to the FPMT Basic Program for study purposes. And it's also directly related to Geshe Doga's commentary. It's also extensively utilised by other Geshes, such as Geshe Jumpa Geltsen and Geshe Jumpa Tekchok. So it's highly recommended. Now, I can jump the following section if there's no need for it, but I was going to introduce the basic program course requirements for those intending to take this subject as an accredited or accreditable unit. So can people just indicate whether they are in fact enrolling as formal students? Just show with an indication of your hand. Yeah, so 2. So I might briefly cover the requirements then. The basic program, as presented by FPMT, is normally a 5-year, 12-subject course of studies designed by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, which provides a practice-orientated transmission of the Buddha Dharma to committed students ready to progress in depth their study and practice. And this is following from the basic program's own formal description on the website. It says some of Tibetan Buddhism's most treasured texts from the heart of the program are Je Tsongkhapa's middle-length Lamrim, Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara, the Heart Sutra, Jetsun Choki Geltson's Tenets, Maitreya's Ornament for Clear Realization, and Tathagata Essence, the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, and other texts guide the practitioner through a comprehensive course of study of Sutra and Tantra. And it goes on, this program's comprehensive curriculum greatly enhances Dharma understanding, establishing a sound basis for ongoing study, practice, retreat, and service. So Thupten Norbu Ling is very, very kindly offering this basic program, this particular one, as an online program. And so if you're wishing to attend it as an enrolled student, then it's necessary that you do contact the centre to formally enroll. And this is, you'll understand, is to give a kind of a fair playing field for those who are putting in extra effort to really, really study this subject, so that they'll be able to sit the various weekly quizzes, informally, by the way, because my weekly quizzes are for your own study use and won't be marked by me. They're there as a kind of key indicator of some key points from which the final examination questions will be largely drawn. So you're also welcome to attend these sessions as we call them in university talk, an auditor, to feel fully present. But if you're not enrolled, there's absolutely no requirement that you do any quizzes or sit any exams. So just to relax and enjoy the opportunity. But for those who are wishing to take it as a formal subject, you need to take those initial steps. So normally when we describe the basic program, we present it in a particular sequence, starting with the stages of the path, which is the Lamrim, the Heart Sutra, followed by Mahayana mind training, as exemplified in that wonderful text, The Wheel of Sharp Weapons. Then engaging in the Bodhisattva's deeds, which is our current topic, then mind and cognition, then tenets, then the order of Ornament for Clear Realization, 70 topics, then the Tathagata Essence, then the grounds and paths of secret mantra, and finally the three basic bodies, death, intermediate state, and rebirth, and a highest yoga tantra commentary. So I'm just mentioning this sequence because it's normally recommended that you do follow that sequence in your own study path, because each topic builds upon the next. However, that isn't set in concrete, and it's really to do with your own enthusiasm and your own aptitude. So if you're really ready and happy to throw yourself in at any point of the basic program, then I'm sure it will be very successful. So, yeah, I could go into more detail on that, but the assessment requirements, I'm just going to mention all these from the outset. The assessment requirement is set by the basic program itself, FPMT, and it's to sit a final exam to fulfill the assessment requirements for the unit. And the second formal requirement is regular attendance. So if for some reason as an enrolled student, you get, obviously things happen in life and we get caught up and can't attend, it'd be very, very nice of you to send in a formal apology, just so that I can keep track as the teacher of who is actually attending and who isn't over the course of 3 months. And in this way, I can take that in consideration when it comes to looking at the exam papers and marking them. And as I mentioned, the weekly quizzes are there really as indicators for potential areas of study. And these are designed for our own study purpose and will be made available a day or two following a particular presentation. So today's quiz isn't ready yet because I'm not sure where I'm going to sign off. And I want to tailor it to the actual content that's being delivered, if you like. The final exam sounds onerous, I know, but it's not really. It's going to be designed as an open book exam. So you're not going to be locked in a room with no windows and doors and no books and no computer and with a sheet of paper and a pencil and a pencil sharpener, and then you'll be allowed to leave in 3 hours. It's going to be up to you to honour the integrity of our approach and to utilise the time, which will probably be 1 or 2 weeks. You'll be generous to write our exam paper and send it in. So it's not designed to be onerous, but because it's going to be an open book exam, I am going to request, and I request strongly, that you do indicate your reference sources clearly. That's what footnotes are for, so that it'll be clear what parts of the material that you're presenting in your examination paper are your own and which have been drawn from other sources. You won't be penalised for drawing material from other sources. To the contrary, I just want to see the fullness of how you've utilised resources in informing your own answers. And so that's process, it should be visible. Several of the exam questions will take the shape of short essay answers of maybe no more than 300 words. So they're just little grabs. And several of the exam questions require a more extensive essay style answer. So they'll be weighted accordingly. Upon successful examination and completion of the course, you'll be awarded formally a certificate by FPMT via Dr. Norberling, and this will work towards your accomplishment over time of all the required units of the basic program, thereby opening the door to more advanced studies and extensive studies, such as the master's program and so forth. So you're strongly encouraged to think about that. And my sort of aim as the teacher isn't to overwhelm you with difficulties at all. I'm really very much looking forward to hearing you speak from your own understanding and your own experience, and to use that in informing your answers. Because as I mentioned before, this is the gist, the absolute gist of Shantideva's purpose in creating this text. So are there any questions on that aspect of the course delivery that before we go on? Doris?
Did you say the exam, we could stretch it out over 1 to 2 weeks? Did I hear that right?
I'll give you the exam paper and ask you to submit it after 1 or 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm trying to say there is I'm giving you ample time to spread your wings. I'm not trying to make it an uphill battle for you. I really want it to be encouraging and open and actually enjoyable. And so not to feel that we're going to be sort of crushed by academic protocol at all, but in all fairness to the basic program globally, because it's taken by many people in many cultural contexts in many different forms around the world, there needs to be a basic sort of standard there. And so I have to acquit that basic standard in a reasonable fashion in order to give credibility to your certificate given at the end of the course. And so that's why I have to balance a certain rigor against making it as free and as enjoyable as possible. So if during the course of the weeks as they unfold, you have any questions about that, let me know. But I think the quizzes will give you a pretty clear idea of which areas exist that you might wish to get more detail about before having any kind of exam. And we'll have an opportunity in each session of discussing those sorts of queries and points. So we'll try to make that a very integrated process. I sometimes have some students who feel that they're not really academic. But as I said, I find the whole notion of academia overwrought. It's kind of hystericalized in the popular culture, isn't it? As a kind of elite, vain and brittle activity pursued by an arrogant few who are often very well paid and in secure university positions. I have a much more open view of academia. And for me, it involves research as a dynamic life skill. And by research, I mean really developing a capacity to explore particular points and aspects of a text, in our case, by following through leads of investigation available to us and emphasized perhaps by me or the teachers of the various commentaries and so forth. So we're really developing that skill of self-inquiry. And that's, for me, the true meaning of an academic pursuit, because there are incredible resources now available to us in English, which have not been there before. And so we're poised on the most incredible moment of kind of global cultural history as intending bodhisattvas to really take some very clear and definite steps. And so His Holiness, when he gives large public discourses in Bodh Gaya and so forth, to which many Tibetans come, and I can't say ordinary Tibetans because that could be seen as sort of pejorative, but many Tibetans who don't have scholastic backgrounds or even literacy, advanced literacy skills, are encouraged by His Holiness to listen to and debate what they've heard with others and to study those texts as much as they can. He really wants to open the door to this kind of direct study outside of the immediate domains of the monastic or nunnery setting, if you like. This is the nature of our time. We're all equally able to throw ourselves in with enthusiasm into real study. So I hope that's encouraging. So we've got a little bit of time, so I'm going to begin with the meaning of the title. And you might laugh at this point because we've got 1,000 verses of this text to cover, and we've just arrived at the meaning of the title in the first discourse. So in Sanskrit, the title is Bodhicharya Vatara. And this is in the original Sanskrit form, which is found with many of our sacred Indian texts. And it was only later translated into Tibetan. So to break this Sanskrit title down, Bodhi in Tibetan, Jangchuk, pertains to the mind of enlightenment. Charya relates to the Tibetan word jopa, which means actions or deeds. Avatara means to enter. This has the implication of serving as an introduction. So putting all of this back together, we have an introduction to the actions of bodhisattvas. However, translators have resorted to various translations, such as a guide to a bodhisattva's way of life, in the case of Batchelor, the way of awakening, according to Geshe Topton, for the benefit of all beings, in the case of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the way of the Bodhisattva in the case of the Padmankara group. Oh, yeah. And I think in an important way, perhaps these miss out on that essential emphasis on introduction. To say something is the way of doesn't give this idea that we're being introduced to the way of. So we can understand this point a little bit more clearly if we consider another kind of text, such as Chandrakirti's Majjhimicavatara, which likewise presents as its principal topic the practices necessary to obtain full enlightenment on the basis of the mind generation of bodhicitta. However, in the case of that text, it does so on the basis of a very comprehensive exposition of the 10 Bodhisattva grounds, corresponding to the 10 perfections. But to be a practitioner on the grounds, to have entered them, in other words, requires that one has not only generated uncontrolled bodhicitta within their continuums upon which they enter, they step upon the Bodhisattva's path for the first time, but that they have also generated a non-conceptual realization of emptiness, and thereby are qualified to be called an Arya being. So in other words, in the case of this text, we're referring to an already highly accomplished spiritual being. In Shantideva's text, in contrast, the method and wisdom aspects are presented in terms of how they give rise to the two bodies of a Buddha, the Dharmakaya and the form body. So it has that in common, but they're presented not on the basis of being a first ground bodhisattva or a second ground bodhisattva and so forth, but from the perspective suited to an ordinary being, referring perhaps to an ordinary being just like ourselves. This is really, really crucial. So we're being introduced by being offered a step after a step after a step by Shantideva that we can immediately take from the position in which we currently already find ourselves. This is really, really exciting, isn't it? Suddenly, we can take our first step towards these great goals from exactly where we currently are, not having to worry about these super egoic, grandiose ideas of spiritual evolution. I won't say grandiose, I'm not sending them up. I'm just saying it can be overwhelming to think of some of these qualities that we can, in fact, generate, but not now, because we're still burdened by very powerful negative habits of thought and so forth. So, in other words, the topics are presented in a deliberately general manner that is easy to understand, even for ordinary and mundane beings like us. And this is because Shantideva has deliberately crafted them in terms of being available or accessible to immediate practice. So if we're to understand the meaning of avatara, to enter in this very personal way, we're being invited to commence in the sense of venture forth, even with a timid, tentative first step on the Bodhisattva path. In other words, we will and can immerse ourselves in this text, which is offering us a complete methodology to engage in the actions of a Bodhisattva. So His Holiness emphasizes that the actions or charya or deeds in this case can be understood in a threefold sense. Firstly, the initial action, which is the development of bodhicitta, the altruistic mind wishing to achieve enlightenment. Secondly, the actual actions which are engaging in the practices of the six perfections. And thirdly, the accomplished action, which is to obtain the ultimate state of enlightenment itself. So you can see here that the three are causally related. Each is the evolution of the last. And to have this evolution in play, we have to take this initial action of stepping onto the Bodhisattva's path. So Gendoga in his commentary says that Bodhisattva Charivatara is a clear and unmistaken presentation of the unmistaken methods for engaging in the deeds and actions of a Bodhisattva, encompassing the six perfections, which lead one to the ultimate state of enlightenment. This explanation of the title in itself, Geshe-Doga says, can provide us with something really significant to contemplate. This is why when His Holiness says, quote, traditionally we don't hear about meditations on the Bodhisattva Charivatara because, quote, when we recite this text, we contemplate the meaning of every single word of it. This, I'm elaborating now from what His Holiness said, this recitation of the text with understanding itself constitutes what His Holiness is referring to as a significant meditation on the meaning of the text. This is evidenced already when we explore, as we're currently doing, the value of reflecting on each word in the title. If we allow ourselves to embrace the text in this dynamic and indeed intimately personal way, the sequence of the chapters will make real sense. So, for example, as already noted, chapter 1 begins with spelling out the advantages of bodhicitta, because quite obviously, if we don't recognize such advantages, namely the unique empowering capacities of such a powerful and rare mind, we will have no inclination whatsoever to venture forth on the Bodhisattva's path. There will be no impulse to take that first step. Instead, we will remain mired in the mud of the ordinary. Likewise, on the basis of such a recognition of the benefits of the awakening thought, the second chapter presents the need to safeguard this thought by abandoning and purifying non-virtue and accumulating meritorious positive deeds, as these twin actions, they work together. Safeguard our mind, our fledgling bodhicitta mind, and open it to safe development in the future. So in other words, it's all very well to think we're going to generate this marvelous mind, but at this moment, it's very fragile. It's like a tiny little sprout that's just emerged from a seed. It can be stepped and crushed in a single blow, as we mentioned before, by a mind of powerful anger. And then we might want revenge, and then we end up in jail, and then we end up hating everyone, and then we end up, et cetera, et cetera. It's just down from there. So unless we can safeguard the conditions supporting this initial growth of this incredibly precious mind, it doesn't stand a chance of becoming stable and developing. So it's really helpful to think of it in this very psychological, practical manner. So then, and only then, are we in a position, as presented in the third chapter, of formally undertaking in the form of a promise or a vow, a commitment to generate this mind of bodhicitta, both aspirationally and through engagement from the very depths of our heart. And it's for this reason that the third chapter is utilized directly by His Holiness and our own precious teachers on many occasions as a methodology or a text for actually conferring the bodhicitta vows. And it becomes a ceremony, in other words. So what I'm trying to do here is just indicate how the meaning of the title can be applied in immediate terms to our own current situation and indeed our own current responsibilities. His Holiness, in his foreword to Geshe Yeshe Topton's book, makes a very meaningful comment. He says, the main emphasis of the book is on nurturing a mind wishing to benefit other sentient beings. In my life, I have read and listened to explanations of it many times. I have thought deeply about it, the meanings it contains, and have even had the good fortune on many occasions to teach it myself. Consequently, I have some experience of the advice contained there and can confidently say that it continues to be relevant and useful today. And His Holiness continues, if we sincerely try to put the core of these teachings into practice, we need have no hesitation about whether they will be effective. Cultivating qualities such as love, compassion, generosity, and patience is beneficial not only on a personal level, but it is helpful to all sentient beings, and even to maintaining harmony in the environment. This is why, says His Holiness, I encourage people to observe such practices. It's not merely so that the tradition may be preserved. So it's precisely in this capacity to act as a practical guide that we should consider the text and also consider supporting each other in our study of it. So I think we're now in a better position to consider the meaning of the term Bodhisattva. So Geshe Doga says that in English, the only translation we have for the Sanskrit word Bodhi is enlightenment. But with the Tibetan, we have a term which is Jangchup, which has a much more precise connotation of the actual meaning. So in the term Jangchup, the word Jang has the connotation of completely eradicating. This relates to having completely eradicated or abandoned the two obscurations, the deluded obscurations and the obscurations to omniscience. The Tibetan word chup has the connotation of acquiring all positive qualities, and the ultimate quality to be accomplished is omniscience. So the state to be achieved, Jangchup, is a state in which all negativities are completely eradicated and all positive qualities have been completely accomplished. So this is what we're striving towards. This is the subject matter of the text. The Tibetan word sattva, which is translated as sempa in Tibetan, means a brave or courageous person, referring to an individual who is inspired and determined to achieve the state of enlightenment. Such a person is not daunted by the task involved in achieving that state, which includes the practice of the 6 perfections. Thus, the person who willingly commits to engage in these actions to achieve the final state of enlightenment is considered to be a courageous one. So within the word Bodhisattva, Bodhi refers to the ultimate state that is to be achieved, and Sattva to the courageous one who has dedicated themselves to achieve that ultimate state. So we ourselves are the ones intending to be courageous ones, because we are inspired, ready, and determined to achieve the ultimate state of enlightenment as our most important, precious aim. And to this end, we will pledge to practice the 6 perfections enabling our goal to reach fruition. All of our activities will be henceforth dedicated towards this purpose. So as I mentioned, how to make this pledge is made, given in chapter 3, the full acceptance of the awakening mind. So following from His Holiness's oral commentary given at Sarnath University in 2013, Geshe Doga reminds us that what is valuable, especially at this initial moment, is to understand the overall 10-chapter structure of the text in terms of the aspirational prayer that we recite on a daily basis. And that prayer is, may the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has risen never diminish, but increase forevermore. So this really epitomizes the entire momentum of the 10 chapters. So the various commentaries explain that there is specific purpose in maintaining the Sanskrit form of the text, even in its Tibetan translation. So in the Tibetan, we find the Sanskrit, then we find the Tibetan translation, then we find the homage of the translator, and then we find Shantideva's homage. So there's a sequence there. So the purpose of keeping the title of the text in its original transcript form has a very deliberate purpose. Presenting the title of the text blesses our mind with the blessed language of the Buddhas. Using the original Sanskrit leaves a good imprint on our minds to be able to master this language so that we might listen and teach in Sanskrit ourselves. In addition, the Sanskrit title indicates the authenticity of the text, showing that it originates from the source of great Indian treatises. So the implication in recognizing that the early Tibetan translators have so meticulously translated this text from the Sanskrit, we are reminded by the translator's homage of the great kindness of these pioneering translators themselves, because without their efforts, we would not ourselves have access to this text today. Moreover, we're being reminded of the importance of a living, unbroken transmission lineage of the text, and from our own small but essential part of keeping this intact lineage alive intergenerationally and indeed interculturally. Because at the moment we're looking at applying the contents of this 8th century text to the immediate coalface of our own existence, set within the world in which we currently find ourselves. How remarkable is it to think that a text, classic text in this manner, can be so absolutely apropos to the needs of transforming and flourishing our own potential for the sake of others. It's really mind-boggling. And so the translators and the sequence of translators have empowered this. So that's also why I'm so happy in my presentation over the coming weeks of quoting from many lineage lamas, because we're all seeking to drink, if you like, from the same source, that of the enlightened words and instructions of the Buddha himself. Our precious lineage lamas, the existence of them, proves that the living transmission of this text is still active and very much alive. So we should feel truly delighted that we too can dip our toes in these glorious waters. So the Tibetan translator's prostration is found following the title. It says, "I prostrate to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas." This is omitted in the Bachelor translation. However, it is included in the Padmankara translation as homage to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Gelt Subje succinctly renders its significance. He says, "The purpose of the translator's prostration is to pacify the obstacles to the translation and to identify this as a commentary belonging mainly to the sutra basket of teachings, although in general it is a commentary on all baskets of the teachings." So this can be understood in a threefold sense. For texts that relate to the sutra basket, as is the case here, the salutation is to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. For texts that belong to the Abhidharma collection, the salutation is made to Manjushri. And for those belonging to the Vinaya basket, the salutation is made to the Omniscient One, meaning the Buddha. So when you sort of we have a general presentation of the significance of the three baskets in this way, we can relate them to practices. So the sutra basket focuses on the training and concentration. The Abhidharma basket on the training in wisdom, and the Vinaya basket on the training in morality. But if you relate this to our text, this should not lead us to presume that the sole focus is on concentration. This is because the general focus extends to all three, as all three are indispensable for our personal development in the path. We can understand this when we take the example of reciting the refuge and generating bodhicitta prayer at the beginning of our teaching, which we did today. The very act of taking refuge, in other words, involves some form of morality. When we take refuge very sincerely and with strong faith, it also encompasses concentration. And when we accompany it with the mind of bodhicitta, it becomes a Mahayana form of refuge. Likewise, when we understand the benefits of taking refuge in conjunction with the practice of wisdom. So we've just got a few, everyone happy going for a few more minutes, or do you want to ask some questions or stop? Happy to keep going for a little bit. So the purpose of paying homage, and we're now going to refer to Shantideva's homage, which is verse 1a, and it's also 1b, sort of broken up into two in Bachelor's translation. It reads, "Respectfully, I prostrate myself to the Sagatas who are endowed with the Dharmakaya, as well as their noble sons, and to all who are worthy of veneration." So, as this is the formal opening of the text itself, why is it so important? Gelt Subje's commentary indicates, quote, "By expressing the qualities of special objects and going for refuge, one comes to understand as a holy being, and the obstacles to the composition of the treatise are pacified. In the end, one attains definite goodness and other disciples will also follow this example. As a result, they will all achieve all accumulations of goodness. So following from that, we can list the reasons for this homage or salutation as follows. The words, by expressing the qualities of special objects and going for refuge, comes to be understood as a holy being, carries a great significance because by paying homage to the great holy beings, this is the essential point, we create the causes to become holy beings ourselves, just as Shantideva has done. Isn't that amazing? How interesting is that? In recognizing Shantideva's purpose in paying homage, we're implicitly paying homage to our own potential enlightenment on behalf of all others. If we're unable, in other words, we're crippled mentally so that we can't recognize the qualities of enlightenment, how on earth can we expect to unfold or discover those qualities, reveal those qualities within ourselves? So by removing the obstacles to the composition, it's said that those forces that might interrupt the successful process of bringing the endeavour to successful completion will be overcome. So to sort of throw this a little bit wider, it's really indicating that when we set out, or upon setting out on a particularly beneficial action, at that moment, we become prone, perhaps, to being disrupted or disturbed by the afflicted minds. And so these afflicted minds often are cast in the personified forms of the Maras, so that when we're about to engage in virtue, the Maras descend upon us, as they did with the Buddha when he was sitting beneath the enlightenment tree, trying to shake him through all sorts of miraculous display, confusing display, hallucinatory displays of power and awesome might from his deep inner purpose of becoming enlightened for the benefit of others. So likewise, we'll face hindrances and obstacles too. And for that reason, by performing prostration at the beginning of our action, we can forestall and potentially dismiss those obstacles, with the end result that oneself will attain definite goodness. Definite goodness here is a reference to liberation from cyclic existence and thus all forms of suffering. So to boil all this down, in our own practice, and I'm not just referring to our practice of studying the text, but I'm referring to every single action that we perform as we go about our daily affairs, we must continuously pay homage to the holy objects of refuge in the same manner as Shantideva, and as Shantideva is demonstrating. And this involves first taking refuge in the three jewels and all who are suitable for homage before engaging in the activity. In other words, we must inquire, do we currently do this? Are we in the practice of paying homage as we go about our daily affairs in this manner to the triple gem? So I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation today how the nature of our actions is dependent upon our attitude, which includes our motivation, of course. And this is the import of Aryadeva's very famous verse, quote, "I have not seen merit and so forth in sentient beings separate from the mind. So I declare that in relation to all deeds, the mind is most important." Also, in his friendly letter, Nagarjuna says, "Be free of hubris. What more is there to say? This alone is the most beneficial point. Discipline your mind, for the blessed Buddha said, the mind is the root of all Dharma." Therefore, I'm inviting us to think along the following lines as recommended by Galrong Sultram Nima in his text, a letter of final testament sent upon the wind. And I quote, "The uncouth," we're thinking this of ourselves, "my uncouth mind has already dragged me into incalculable suffering, and yet it remains unsatisfied and seeks to make me suffer more, inducing me to squander this human existence of leisure and opportunity I have obtained this once. From here on, however," this is the resolve, "from here on, however, I'll not let myself be besieged by this uncouth mind. May all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions bless me so that I might succeed in this endeavor." So this kind of thought generation, even at a glance, can be understood as radically reinventing our activities and the purpose of our activities. And I'm going to use the very obvious but famous example of giving even a mouthful of food to a dog. If our purpose is to stop the dog from yapping because it's driving us bonkers, it's a very limited benefit. But if we combine that benefit with a homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all those worthy of respect, and then seek their blessings that through this mere act of offering a morsel of food to this animal, this poor suffering sentient being, may they have everything they require for happiness of body, all the conditions they require to transform their mind, all the support they need and so forth, up until full enlightenment, then that is a radically different act. And it has a radically different karmic outcome. It's not just fanciful. It's not just folly to rethink situations this way. It's actually profoundly transforming the meaning and significance of our actions. In other words, our ordinary act of giving, just shoving the food at the dog to stop it barking, is transformed into a supramundane action. Or if not actually supramundane, it's an action leaning towards the supramundane, in that we're seeking to look after this single animal, and in dependence on that, to be able to properly look after all beings through this single act of giving on this occasion. So you can see here how we're talking about a mind practice that's incredibly expansive and incredibly beneficial. So Shantideva renders this point specifically in the first chapter by way of a very vivid juxtaposition between ordinary acts of charity and those extraordinarily expansive and extensive acts of charity based on the mind of Bodhicitta. And I'll quote these two verses. "The world honours as virtuous a man who gives just a little plain food, disrespectfully for a few beings, that satisfies them for only half a day. What need be said then of one who eternally bestows the peerless bliss of the Sagatas upon limitless numbers of sentient beings, thereby fulfilling all their hopes?" So in conclusion, as Konsang Pelden indicates, the act of paying homage, together with the promise to complete the work, together with humility and enthusiasm, which follow in the next several verses, have the significance. He says, apply this significance not just to the composition of treatises, but to any activity, whether of explaining or listening to the teachings, meditating upon them, and so forth. They ensure that whatever one does will proceed without impediment, and that one's task will be brought to a good conclusion. The two poles of intellectual arrogance and lazy depression will be avoided. So we'll stop at that point, and we'll recite the dedication prayers. So I'll ask Lou to share the prayer document. Now we do have something very real to dedicate, so deeply feel the meaning of the verses. Quoting from Shantideva, "For as long as space endures, for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, and through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings, which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy, be materially supported and honoured and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never diminish but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his divine white action spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms." And the long life prayers. The wish-granting jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until psychic existence is ended. Kabjezo Rinpoche. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, serve as a bountiful bearer of all. Sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunat's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplished magnificent prayers honouring the 3 jewels, save of myself and others your disciples, please, please live long. Tenzin Osel Hita. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request, O Lama, please, please live long. And Venerable Losang Doga, you with an immutable vow to spread to the limits of space the Dharma of the Able One in general and the Dharma of the pure-minded conqueror, supreme, superior, spiritual friend of unrepayable kindness, please remain for hundreds of eons and bestow the supreme and common cities. And Geshe Tupten Sherab, beloved teacher, leading your students towards wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path, you are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life. And we'll just do the first 3 multiplying mantras to increase our merit. Chomdin de Shinche Padra, Chompa Yang Dapa Sope Sange, Nampa Nang Ze Oki Gelpola Chag Selo, Jungchup Sempa Sempa Chempo Kuntu Zangpo La Chag Selo, Tayata Penchagriya Avabadani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jayamukhi Swaha, Tayata Penchagriya Avabadani Soha, Om Duru Duru Jayamukhi Soha Swaha, Tayata Penchagriya Avabadani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jayamukhi Swaha, Tayata Penchagriya Avabadani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jayamukhi Swaha, Tayata Penchagriya Avabadani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jayamukhi Swaha, Tayata Penchagriya Avabadani Swaha, Om Duru Duru Jayamukhi Swaha. So thank you very much for attending today. And I look forward to continuing the topic and sharing the time with you. So thanks so much. And I'll post the first quiz in the next couple of days. And if you have any questions arising from that or in relation to the presentation today, then we'll have an opportunity of bringing those up tomorrow. So thank you very much. Take care, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ross.